Hello, mighty adventurers. We are once again here to discuss something of great importance. We're going to talk about a very important seminal module today that kind of transformed the history of role-playing when it came out and why you should read it and why you should run it for yourself. We are going to talk about the first entry into the Enemy Within campaign, Shadows Over Bögenhafen. So Shadows Over Bögenhafen. Now, this book that I'm using is the 4th edition version of the module. It actually contains a short preamble adventure and then the main module itself, Shadows Over Bögenhafen. And that's why it's called Enemy in Shadows, because it's kind of like a compilation of those two things. The two, you would almost always run the two together, especially if you were using Shadows Over Bögenhafen as the first module in a campaign. It is written for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. It was written by Graeme Davis for first edition, along with a number of other writers that contributed to that particular series, and is important to the history of role-playing for a number of reasons. One, because it's brilliant, and two, because it showed that you could do a particular type of adventure in a fantasy setting that had not previously really been done as successfully with D&D. It is set in Warhammer Fantasy's setting, obviously, and the general through line is, to make it really, really simple so everyone can pass what's going on, is the adventurers turn up in a city, a large town, Bögenhafen, which is in the Reichland. They visit a carnival. They become aware, while they're at the carnival, this kind of like great kind of like farmers festival, that there's something going on in the town, that actually the noble houses in the city, in Bögenhafen, they're all up to something evil, something chaotic. It's really reminiscent, if you ever watched anything, like Hot Fuzz, you've read The Shadow over Innsmouth, where everyone in town is kind of secretly in on something that they shouldn't be. It's in a similar vein to that, although it's really just the nobles. And the characters slowly get drawn up into this conspiracy. And if they are good people, which generally, even though we like to think that WFRP characters are very roguish and amoral, they always are basically good people, that actually they're going to try and put a stop to this evil ritual that this kind of group of nobles, this weird cult, are going to try and enact, which will open up a gateway into the realm of chaos. This particular version is, let's just have a look. It is very long. In terms of the page count, yeah, it's 159 pages. There is loads of stuff in this. I've run this game, just a couple of bona fides before we really jump into it. I have run this module 4 times. I have run it once for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd edition, and I used the 1st edition version of this module. I've run it once on my own old school system, Journeyman Expert Master, and for that version, I used the 1st edition version again, the 1st edition WFRP version, and then I've run it twice for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition using this, which is the 4th edition version. Now, and every single time it worked really, really well. And all bar one of the times, which was the first time I ran it as the first adventure of the campaign that then drew characters into the Enemy Within campaign, which is in of itself one of the most important campaigns in the history of role-playing. So the themes of this particular module and why it's interesting, it's set in a town and it's a very urban adventure. And what quickly happens is the characters realize that there's something going on and they're not exactly sure who to trust. And there is this real sense of grimdark. There's a real sense of machinery in the background, moving in the background of society that the characters don't really have that much control over, and it's really engaging for them to start to unpick it. So let's just go through it a little bit closer, beat by beat. There is the Edelring, which is a group of nobles, and the leader of them, Burgomeister Johannes Tugen, who is nominally in charge of the town. He's not actually the Graf, but he's kind of like an elected official, an appointed official that's in charge of the town. He wants to perform a ritual that he believes will make the town more wealthy, specifically himself more wealthy. And he's being helped by someone called Gideon, which seems like, to everyone else, someone that he met at university, the University of Nuln. And as the module goes on, it's evident that Gideon is actually a demon. And Gideon is a kind of like changeling and is actually really pulling the strings. What Tugen doesn't know is that if he enacts this ritual, it will result in his death and his soul being consumed by the gods of chaos, and it will open up a rift to the realm of chaos in the middle of Bögenhafen. So that's where the players have to kind of get involved and stop it. what happens is they arrive in town and the Schaffenfest is on, which is this farming festival. And as they go around, it's a brilliant section, both in this book and in the first edition module, where you have this whole list of different activities that are supported by the mechanics that are going on. There's lots of rumors, but there's things like drinking competitions, arm wrestling competitions, pig wrestling competitions. There's all kinds of groups where there's like the Stevedores Guild, you know, the kind of guys who pack like river barges, the Stevedores Guild who are wanting to fight with the Farmers Guild, and then there's people from other towns wanting to get involved, and there's a carnival judge, and there's a dwarf. And it's important, if you're going to run this, that this event happens. There's a dwarf that is kind of in the stocks, the carnival stocks, because he's been drunk and disorderly, basically. And the players can get involved, and they can actually pay his fine for him. I always make a point of making this dwarf, endearing this dwarf to the player character, because what happens is he gets out of the stocks eventually, and there is this wonderful moment, vignetted kind of scene in the carnival with Dr. Malthusius, who is a kind of zookeeper. He's got all these strange mutants, and he has a three-legged goblin that escapes. It actually escapes twice, and the second time it escapes, it properly escapes. It gets away, and it goes into the sewers, and Dr. Malthusius, who is kind of a charlatan, he's a really engaging NPC to play, and the players always really enjoy engaging with him and sort of interacting with him. In Fear of a Black Dragon, the old school RPG podcast with Jason Cordova and Tom, I forget Tom's name, when they talked about this module, which had actually ran before I listened to that, but when they talked about it, Tom talks about how he always plays Dr. Malthusius as a kind of Brian Cox, Wonders of the Universe kind of person. And ever since I listened to that, I was like, oh yeah, that works perfectly. This kind of like thin, preening kind of charlatan is the best way to play it, talk about it. So they are hired by Dr. Malthusius to hunt down this goblin that's escaped. They go into the sewers, they find the goblins, they follow the goblin. The sewer section is amazing. The sewer section is the best sewer dungeon that I've ever kind of looked at in a game ever, I've ever ran, ever played. It's not a boring sewer level, because what happens is the characters, there's a really good kind of believable network of sewers. And what I mean by that is there's lots of random encounters like gas pockets. It's not just that there's like monsters underground. There's like gas pockets, and they can get lost, and really detailed rules on how the cisterns work so they can get in and out at certain places. And they follow this goblin. They find that dwarf that also went to try and find the goblin, that dwarf that they helped out in the starts early. They find him dead. So it's nice to have foreshadowed that, to broadcast that, telegraph that early to the players. And then they come across a ritual chamber where the goblin has been eaten by a demon that is trapped in a kind of pentagram in an underground chamber, someone's basement. Now, the demon, WFRP, has lots of rules for things like fear, corruption, and what quickly happens is the players all scatter, right? They're not heroic characters in the sense that they're not competent at fighting, especially if you do this as their first adventure, that they just want to get out of there. So they all run out, but then the question becomes, what was that demon doing in the basement, in someone's basement, and who is responsible for that? And it doesn't take long for them to realize that it was almost certainly beneath one of the nobles' houses, one of the nobles' warehouses, the Steinhager kind of offices. And there's this interesting kind of moment where you can, it's up to you how you run it. I don't actually belabor this particular moment very much in all the times I've run it, but they effectively do a stakeout, they get some information, and all of a sudden there's all these different moving parts that they can interact with, and the adventure, the narrative becomes very non-linear, because there's different nobles that are thinking of betraying Johannes's plan because they're frightened, and some that might betray him because they want to benefit more than he, they want to kind of like they want to kind of take advantage of the situation. And what happens is the players stake out, they find all this information. One of the nobles definitely approaches them. One of the kind of like a poorer, well, he's actually richer, but he's less powerful than the others, approaches them and tells them that this is going on. He's eventually killed by Gideon, which is a great moment when the players get to his house and they realize that Gideon's there and he's killed them. And eventually what they work out is that the date for the ritual has been set, and they have to figure out the place of the ritual, go there and stop it. And it sets up this wonderful finale that is really, really satisfying. I've talked before about how old school modules, both OSR modules, like modules written now, but kind of playing on the past, and actual also modules, things like Temple of Elemental Evil, they don't come to any kind of natural culmination. But Shadows Over Bögenhafen does. It comes to this wonderfully cinematic set piece ending where you can have the ritual begin and like the floor in this warehouse that's on the docks kind of begin to dissolve and screaming demons start leaping out, and they've got to just stop it. And it's really, really, really wonderful. Now, what do I like about this? Pretty much everything. Ever since its conception, and ever since I first ran it, it is something that I always come back to. And you should definitely, even if you don't run it, you should definitely read it. Now, I've got some issues with the formatting in the 4th edition version. The 4th edition version is wonderful. There's lots of art, but some of the most important information is hidden in kind of like dense paragraphs of text. I'm not someone who necessarily kind of obsesses over the formatting of modules, which I think some of us in the OSR do a little bit. But this is a little bit kind of over the top even for me. It's really hard to run this at the table if you haven't read the entire thing first. So if you are going to read it, so if you are going to run it, read the whole thing first before you even try and run anything. And then what I would do is I would pass out the most important information. I would assume that just reading it is not your prep, and actually your prep is preparation, is going through and kind of divining the most useful bits of information and have a really good sense of what each of the NPCs are and what they're going to do. And I would come up with a way of characterizing them as different, because it's kind of like running a Call of Cthulhu module. It's more like running a Call of Cthulhu module than it is running a D&D module, because the characters are characters and they're interesting. So that is the NPCs. They're interesting, they're developed, and they are different. So I would go through it, I'd have a really good sense of it. And then I would be very aware of when I need to press the player characters to make a decision, because it's a mystery, and how I angle the camera, as is, to make sure that those decisions happen. So when they first arrive at the Schaffenfest and they're wandering around this kind of like farmers carnival, that's fine. Just like let them interact with everything. Like, let's sit back. That's the easiest bit to run. Just make sure that they get, they meet the dwarf, for example. But the moment that I would really make you aware of in this module is there's two massive concerns that I have about Shadows of Bögenhafen, despite its brilliance. One, sometimes players don't want to take the hook. So they get to the point where they see the demon and actually they're like, oh, well, we're Wuthrup characters, we're apathetic, we're horrible, this has nothing to do with us. And actually, you can end up in a situation where your players are trying to play their characters, but they're over-rationalizing this to the point where they go, well, our characters would not involve ourselves with this. I think you need to find a reason to do that. Perhaps drawing the characters in. If you've got any characters that are witch hunters or wizards, or they're a little bit more than just kind of like, servants and rat catchers, that would be a really good opportunity to emphasize the need for action, but also emphasize the need for the unreliable nature of the government in this particular setting. The fact that they can't just go to the authorities because everyone knows they'll just be thrown in prison. Sometimes it's nice to have a guard captain, though, that is willing to help them, because that can be quite helpful. So that's one thing. Make sure that you give them a reason, because it is something that I've run up against. I know one of my closest friends also has played this module, not in my group, and he said they ran into this exact issue, and he got to the point where the game master just had to say, this is the adventure, like you can not have to do this, but this is the adventure, so I'll have to do something else. I don't want to put anyone in that situation. So what I would do is I would look at the players' careers, their effective class in WFRP, and draw on reasons to get involved based on those. The other thing is I would just make sure that the other thing that is kind of worth paying attention to is that there is a lot of moving parts, and it is really important that they find the warehouse. And the way they find the warehouse in the module is effectively a puzzle. They get a note that says WHSE, and then there's a number, and I think it's 13. They're supposed to go to warehouse 13. It is perfectly possible, because players are players and they're just ordinary people, that you'll give them they'll get the clue, and they'll be like, I don't know. I'll look at the map, they'll be like, I don't know how to get to this situation. And that is the problem that we have all the time when running mysteries. Now, the temptation would be to say, well, here's a skill, just do a skill check and I will tell you the answer. But I really think you can actually, you can telegraph this a little bit more clearly by having them find other things. I think the Alexandrians 3-clue rule when running mysteries is really important when running this. Don't actually just rely on the module when it says, okay, they'll find this note and it says WHSE 13. actually you need to give them other reasons to go to the warehouses on the docks. Maybe they find along with it something that they would only find in these warehouses, maybe fishing equipment or something like that. Just something else that points them in the right direction, and then they can go there. I would also give yourself the opportunity to get NPCs in that are going to betray them, because that is really satisfying. Even if the betrayal results in the death of that NPC very, very quickly, I think that sort of madcap, slightly farcical, the slightly farcical nature of the narrative is what makes WFRP and what makes this module brilliant. It's not just a mystery. It's not grim. It's grimdark, right? It's meant to be bordering on the absurd, bordering on the comical, and actually, when at the end you've got them in this warehouse and they are trying to stop these demons from, these really inimical forces from coming out of this portal. Where you also have the guard captain turn up and try and arrest them for starting a bar fight the night before, and then the priest that they've also helped. He's like, he couldn't stay in bed. He felt like he had to involve himself, and all of a sudden you have all these. You're like, who else is going to turn up next, right? Is it going to be the village Bobby? So I would emphasize the farcical nature of this at its climax as well. But I really think that this is a brilliant version, the 4th edition version. The maps are wonderful. I would just be aware that the text is very dense. In many ways, the 1st edition version isn't any better. It's not that this is a kind of a movement in the wrong direction. If anything, actually, it gives you so much stuff that it can only be better. Shadows Over Bögenhafen, Enemy in the Shadows, Enemy Within Part 1, remains one of the most important modules in the history of role-playing, and is almost certainly one of the opening to one of the best campaigns, maybe the best campaign ever written. I hope you found this interesting and you would like to go away and run this, because I think that this is a really wonderful module, and I've run it many times, and will almost certainly run it many times again in the future. But as ever, like and subscribe, do all that good stuff. But thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to this. I really appreciate it, and I will speak again soon. Thank you.